Now, as you know, we talk about immigration a lot on this show, not on the cultural aspects. That's sort of the easy clickbait that can exist for other conversations here. This is simply about the number of people we have in the country and whether we have got the stuff to actually support it. Remember, 30 years ago, 18 million people. 30 years later, so from 1995 to 2025, it's now what? Almost 30 million, 27, 28 million. Roll forward another 30 years. Well, guess what? We are around 2050 going to be close to 45 to 50 million people. Does anyone think we've got the current roads to deal with 30 million, let alone future roads, future suburbs, let alone the changes to everything from water infrastructure to public transport, all the rest of it? Hence why we discuss this matter the way that we currently do. But also, we talk about it because it is where the majority of Australians are. Now, it doesn't matter what the poll and what the headline says, it says it over and over again. The majority of Australians think that there are too many people being able to come into the country, not because they have a great fear of foreigners, but because they know currently when they call 000, what happens? When they're in the back of an ambulance, what happens? When they're lining up for a queue or sitting on a toll road, what happens? Now, again, I repeat, it wasn't just one, it's multiple organisations which have found the same thing. You go from the Daily Telegraph to the Sydney Morning Herald, just looking at the Sydney of things. When people are asked about migration, how the government is handling things, most people not happy. Why? Because on this poll, 49% of people say that the current numbers are too high. So with the undecided, you just need 1% of the 18% undecided, and then bang, you're bang on 50-50. Two of them, you are at the majority. That is where the majority of Australians are. Remember, when we look at polls, we always split the undecided 50-50, half go to yes, half go to no. That would make this pretty clear that Australians have their issues at the moment with migration. But you are not allowed to discuss. The old playbook, which was used on Peter Dutton, is now being used on Susan Lee as the opposition leader. She too is starting to move in the area, suggesting that, yeah, we do have to maybe think about chopping maybe as many as 100,000 people off the list that Labor has currently been bringing in at near record levels. Why? Because there aren't enough houses right now for the current population, let alone a future one. The strain that eventually it puts on the health system as, inevitably, everyone gets older, and the problems with schools. Put simply, 30 years ago, the school that I went to had 1,000 students. Same school, no major improvements, has now got 1,500 people in it. Well, I'm talking about a good old-fashioned normal public school, high school, in fact. In fact, this is what Susan Lee has had to say about previewing her next move, which is to align with those of us who believe migration is too high.
The migration numbers into Australia are far too high. And Labor has got this all wrong. We have to have a balance between infrastructure and people coming to Australia. We have to recognise, as every community we speak to does, that the pressures on communities, whether it be housing, whether it be roads, whether it be public transport, schools, hospitals, those pressures are out of balance with migration.
And just as the bulk of the media believe that any conversation around the reduction of the target of net zero or walking away from it, even though they still are committed to climate action, even though they still say they're going to want to bring emissions down in 1% of the world's problem, this will be electoral suicide. Another smoke signal was put up again by the same types of people. And again, there is some evidence that this might be a little bit wobbly. It's all about how you have the argument. I disagreed with the Andrew Hastie line about being strangers in your own country. That's stuff that just is not going to play in the myriad of multicultural seats that now exist, particularly around Sydney and Melbourne. But again, the warning is there. By the way, news poll suggesting Susan Lee no longer the most popular person to be leading the opposition. We'll get to that in a moment or two's time. But on all of this, enter the Godfather, Don Farrell, Senator from South Australia, power broker, trade minister, special minister of state. If he doesn't want it to happen, it doesn't happen, largely inside this government. Arguably second most powerful person after the Prime Minister because, as profiles have told us, this bloke knows everything about every office in every part of the Labor side of Parliament. He says that matters to do with immigration should be bipartisan, warning against getting involved in the conversation of the cut to migration. Now, remember, I've said it 1,000 times why I focus on the topic, but again, just as the Labor Party is trying to pretend that by not having a net zero target for 2050, somehow the Libs don't believe in climate change, despite the fact they still do, and are promising to continue to bring down emissions, as they lied during the election about cuts to Medicare that were nowhere to be seen, is this the beginning of a third big lie that will be shoved down our throats?
I'd be disappointed if they headed in that direction. Immigration is important for the future of this country. It should be a bipartisan issue.
Now, as we know, the current Prime Minister is the greatest of all time. He will be the leader for as long as he chooses to, and we are simply lucky enough to be paying tax in his world. But every now and then, the reality of the Australia that he leads is slightly different than the one that he promised us, like this in opposition.
Truth is that we're an open, transparent party. There needs to be complete transparency. What we need is a Prime Minister who's prepared to be transparent, a more honest and transparent government going forward. Who will make it transparent? We're being transparent.
You get the point. But as I've shown you many times, the reality of Australia right now, and particularly Parliament House, is that it is sort of becoming Albo's chamber of secrets, where a lot of things are redacted, a lot of things are not allowed to be seen. A lot of things get flushed down the toot for no one to ever know until long after the Prime Minister has been there. A perfect example. Australia has a relationship with the country of Nauru, and it has for political generations now, for Australia to be able to say to people who try to arrive here by boat, you're not making it to Australia, we're going to take you to a place like Nauru first. Again, no controversy, very popular, sound policy for people who believe that countries should have borders, that you should fill out the forms, that you should have the permission to enter a country rather than just randomly jumping the queue. I know, controversial opinions, but that is, of course, the reality. Well, as I told you a few weeks ago, there was an interview between one of the Nauruan government ministers and their staffers about the deal, about what's in the deal between Australia and Nauru. And this was not a secretly recorded conversation. It was posted on Facebook. Yet some weird reasons were given as to why the Australian government would not release an English translation of what had been said and what is publicly available right now on Facebook. At the time, the interview was published online. A staff member of the High Commission in Nauru produced an informal English translation for internal purposes. The staff member, who was employed by the Australian government at the time, was not an accredited translator. The translation has not been endorsed by the Nauruan government, which did not provide its own version. Thus, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade confirmed the existence of the document in response to what the ABC had asked for, which was a Freedom of Information request. Remember, this government wants to make it even harder for people to be able to get information from government through freedom of information. But the department rejected the request for its release, citing exemptions designed to protect against damage to international relations and contempt of court. You see, this is me speaking now, the reality is that the left have always hated offshore processing, always hated it. And remember the stupidity that when the government was going into minority post-Turnbull, that there were people that were up and screaming and were doing everything they possibly could to empty everyone offshore under the premise that everyone had serious health issues. They ended up coming here medevaced to Australia, yet all of them ended up leaving hospital. No one ended up having anything serious or anything permanent taking place, but the left has always hated this. So much so that next year, one of the things that the Labor Party, my apologies, their media friends, the ABC is doing is a documentary in and around the Tampa 25 years on. Because again, the left hates the idea of Australia having enforceable borders. It hates the idea that people, yes, have been denied access to the country for a long period of time. And now we see even 25 years after things like offshore processing were put in place and perfected by the Howard government, the left is still trying to tell us why this is all so terrible, which is why they don't want to know, or they are trying to know, the details of how much money we are paying a country like Nauru to make sure that people never get here. Well, guess what has just been announced? You won't be able to see even, dare I say, the sort of shorthand version of this for 10 years. Of all of the things this government wants to keep secret, they are deciding to keep secret the English translation of what was said by a Nauruan president on a video that is publicly available on Facebook. What was it that Albo promised again when it came to how he'd run his government?
Truth is that we're an open, transparent party. There needs to be complete transparency. What we need is a Prime Minister who's prepared to be transparent, a more honest and transparent government going forward. Who will make it transparent? We're being transparent.
So his Chamber of Secrets is also interchangeable with Each Way Albo, where again you promise one thing in opposition, you do something completely different in government, and because nobody wants to rock the boat, nobody doesn't want to get invited to drinks at the lodge, the media barely wobble the boat, let alone actually rock it. Perfect example. In and around the events in Parliament a few years ago that made us all too aware of some of the people who worked in the then Defence Minister's office, a wider conversation was had about how, if inappropriate things take place in Parliament House, there needed to be a system put in place to make sure that someone would be able to step outside of the political boundaries of the minister, shadow minister or member of parliament that they work for to be able to make a workplace complaint no different than any other job in the country. In fact, this is exactly what the then opposition leader and now greatest Prime Minister of all time said about such a system.
We cannot ask the people we represent to make change without also making real and lasting change in this very building. We must, to put it simply, walk the talk.
Yeah, even though, of course, he neither walked nor talked when it came to the complaints of Labor Party staffers, close to more than 50 of them that were willing to tell the truth about the people that they had worked for, some of which deeply unpleasant, some of it borderline criminal. But no, nothing to see here. So now we, of course, have the greatest Prime Minister with the greatest government with the most transparent attitude possible, parading around Parliament House as the kings and queens of all time in a brand new Australian Parliament that was far more particularly female-friendly. So pardon me if I noticed a story that reads, Parliament watchdogs reporting may conceal rape and sexual assault complaints. What, the sorts of things that, of course, became weaponised by, among others, the Mean Girls? Shh, none of that. That's all. Quick, look over here. Quote, dozens of complaints of the most serious workplace offences, including rape and sexual assault, may go unreported each year after the Parliament's Employee Support Service altered its reporting methods. The service, which received 40 complaints of bullying, 28 instances of harassment during its second year in operations, has been slammed by a senator who alleged that she was sexually harassed in Parliament House. The Victorian Independent, Lydia Thorpe, said the service was potentially hiding misconduct from the public under the proviso of protecting complainants' privacy. At least 61% of the complaints in the past year, 12 months, about things like harassment or bullying are the staff of MPs. Parliament goes back for the final few days of the year this week. Let's see if all of those people who asked all of those questions, not just about what may or may not have happened in the office, but more importantly, what happened the day after in the Defence Minister's office, who pushed what has now been proven to be a lie, not once but twice, by courts around the country about a political cover-up about the events of that evening, whether these people will have any interest in trying to tell us why has the system that was established to prevent such lack of transparency now become a little less transparent. Lydia Thorpe, we know when she wants to make noise, can make plenty of noise in and outside of the chamber. Will she do so on this issue? Not just about her own personal circumstances, of which the senator of which she accused has strenuously denied. But what about the Tiffany Teals? What about the oh-so-goody Greens? What about a media that was more than happy to talk about the culture of Parliament House, who now suddenly won't care at all about the culture of Parliament House because it might end up knocking out one or two people who they like in Parliament House? I would hope that's not the case. But we've all got this week to watch it together to see what's true or not.